Welcome back. Um, Great decisions. These are all great decisions, to quote Laura Robson, but oftentimes they're not ours to make. But we are coming down to the wire with our great decisions this year. We have two more after today. Join us next week for Nuclear Negotiations, Back to the Future. And that's going to be with Alex Montgomery from Reed College, who did a great program for us this last year on North Korea, on nukes and networks. And he is actually one of my favorite people in town to talk about nuclear non-proliferation issues. He is smart as the dickens. He's spoken for this group before, not for a number of years, but so that'll be next week in here. And we will close out things with Maureen Hickey from PSU, who will be speaking on refugees and global migration on March 8th. As always, the International Speaker Series. This will kick off next week, March 3rd, with Julian Castro. It is a Sunday night. My apologies if you had plans on your Sundays. Our opening and our closing event are on Sundays, and a lot of it had to do with speaker schedules and with the venue, which it is hard to get into the Newmark Theater where we have moved the series this year, because everyone wants to be in this cozy, wonderful, intimate space that puts you closer to the action of the speaker. But Julian will be here March 3rd talking about public activism and the future of public service, especially as it pertains to the next generation, because we are looking at youth and youth empowerment this year. We're very excited about all the speakers we have. After Julian, we have Jaha Dukora, who is from the Gambia, who is a gender rights activist. We have Farah Pandith, who used to work for the State Department as a liaison between the Muslim community and the US State Department. And she has a new wonderful book called How We Win, which looks at using, and this is relevant to today's discussion, using technology and using online networks to counter violent extremism. And she does this, if any of you have read our Harry Potter books, she's done this by assembling what she calls Dumbledore's army to get people moving the other direction in terms of where they put their energies online. And then we close out the series on June 23rd with Erica Fernandez, who is an environmental justice activist from California, originally from Mexico. We like to build bridges, but so much of our discussions lately are about walls, and I think Erica will be a really wonderful way to end out the series. Also, we're nearing the end of the series, so these wonderful Great Decisions books are now $22. That is $10 off the cover price. If you would like to buy one, we have them out there. You'll see up here this very long URL. This is the survey for the Great Decisions for this year. If you could do me a favor and bookmark that, and when you're sitting there later, in between waiting for the results on the British Bake Off show, you can fill that out and help us out. And that brings us to today. I'm very excited that we have somebody from the FBI. It's always fun to say that. Gabriel Gunderson is the cyber supervisor for the. Oh wait, you know what? I'm gonna backtrack. I forgot I was supposed to say something earlier that I didn't say. We're having a raffle. We're having a raffle. And you're going to be getting an email about this. We're having a raffle. You can enter to win tickets this weekend by midnight on Sunday, and you will get passes to the post-talk reception with Castro, which is generally limited to about 150 people. So if you register online, details on the website, you can be in the room with someone who is really one of the new faces of leadership in this country. So now, back to my intro. Gabriel Gunderson is the cyber supervisor for the Oregon Cyber Task with the Portland FBI. He has 15 years of investigative experience in complex cyber criminal and national security investigations. Prior to the FBI, he was a hardware design engineer in Silicon Valley responsible for designing carrier-class routers and package-switched circuits. And if you're like me, I have no idea what that means, but he's probably going to enlighten us and make us not fear the the forest primeval of the internet. Give him a hand.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How's my audio? Is that okay? All right. Well, thanks for the intro. My name is Gabe, or Gabriel, as my mother calls me when she's angry. Or it's been way too long since I've called her. I am one of the hated Bay Area transplants. I moved up here in 2011 from FBI San Francisco, now FBI Portland. We can move around a fair amount in our organization, and it's not uncommon to work in a few different offices. But that's good, right? Diversity, working different places, seeing different things. We're able to work with different populaces, different communities, and get a feel for what it is we do, right? Crime in different areas. The more we understand the areas and the people behind them, the better we can understand how to do a better job at policing our state or our government. I'm not a cop. I'm not a traditional law enforcement officer in that sense. I didn't come in and work bank robberies and gangs. I didn't do Italian La Cosa Nostra mafia cases. I came right into Seattle field office in 2004, and I was one of the 4 or 5 engineers they hired that year. So what better to do with an engineer than put him on a cyber squad? It was a relatively new concept in the FBI in the early 2000s. Obviously, we had pivoted largely from criminal enterprise groups to terrorist groups after 9/11. Terrorist groups weren't using the internet so much, but a lot of people were, and they were using the internet for a lot of things. The majority of my cases, starting off with, were largely financially motivated criminal behavior, right? Using the internet to make money. Not a new concept. People have been trying to make money and trick other humans throughout time, throughout our country, throughout nations. Most of my time was spent understanding what cyber criminals were doing, why they were doing it, and how they did it, and then tracking them down. Over the years, and I'll circle back to the chapter. I'm sure many of you have read, because it was assigned homework, right? First homework I've gotten in a long time. Much of the cyber criminal behavior started off with people making money, people using the internet to communicate their methods, their tactics, their tradecraft. Obviously, I mean, I'm not excluding the legitimate purpose of the internet and communication channels, but obviously my focus is on the illegitimate, the influence and the criminal behavior. The FBI gets involved in the internet because it crosses state lines. If you go to your local sheriff's office, your local police community liaison officer, they're gonna look at you and take notes, and then they're gonna give it to us. That's pretty much been our mission since 1908, right? When crimes cross state boundaries. The internet, of course, is ubiquitous, goes everywhere. Not just state boundaries, but also geographic and nation-state boundaries, right? Much more trickier when crimes cross the continent or to another country, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, now let's fast forward to, where are we? 2019, right? The years move by quickly. Now it's the same criminal activity, the same criminal behavior, it's still there. It's definitely more complicated, it's much harder to find, more prolific. The loss amounts per year, it's a nonlinear growth, okay? So 2 years ago in the state of Oregon, we looked at probably $1 to $2 million of reported loss based on cyber fraud. Last year it was 4 to 5 million. This year it's 10 to 12 million. That is a non-linear graph, right? It's worse every year. It's more and more loss, more and more scams, more and more trickery. I could spend a lot more time on that, but that's obviously not why we're here. I will say, when you are interacting with people who you don't know, this is an easy one. Obviously not loved ones, family, and friends, but someone you do not know, someone you've met over the internet, someone you've met in a chat room or email or Facebook or Instagram, and they ask you for money. Probably think twice about that. Last week I talked to a woman who got an email from the Chinese government. And the Chinese government said, hey, and she was Chinese. She's a legal permanent resident here in Oregon. This particular Chinese woman was fearful of her government. And there are reasons why people move country boundaries. She was fearful. The Chinese government told her that a large percentage of her income was reported to be fraudulent out of China and that she needed to pay it back. And that cost her pretty much everything she had, about $890,000. Pretty significant amount of money for a very easy scam to do over the internet, purporting to be a member of the Chinese government. It happens here as well, right? I mean, you get calls from the IRS and the FBI and the Secret Service and the Department of Homeland Security, and they're going to come to your house and arrest you because you haven't done the following things. But you can clear that all up with a quick, easy payment to a PayPal account or using Best Buy gift cards. I guarantee you the IRS will not take your taxes in Best Buy gift cards. Guarantee. I'm not an IRS agent, but I've met a few and quite sure that's accurate. Okay, so with respect to the chapter on cyber geopolitics, or just geopolitics in general, I liked the chapter. I went through it myself, obviously, and to kind of get a feel for what this discussion was about. It is fascinating to look back in history, to look at the 15th century to the 19th century, and that migration from maritime technology to rail technology and the industrial age. And then into the 19th century, 20th century, if you worked on any FBI system, you feel like you're in the 18th century because our systems are a little behind. But 19th, 20th century, 21st century, we have the electronic age. We have this thing called the internet. I should have brought some slides. The internet is vast and ubiquitous, and it's vague, right? It works on my phone, it works on my Apple TV at home, it works on the computer. What you see on the internet is, there's an iceberg analogy. Okay, the iceberg. 10% above the water is what you see of an iceberg. Now the other 90% lies beneath the water. That's relatively true for the internet. The internet is of what is indexed and searchable. The things you see are about 10%. When you go to CNN, Fox, or KGW, whether it's your news, you go to Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter for social media, whether you go to Target and Amazon for buying things, that is about 10%, right? It's a lot. It's a tremendous amount. That 10% is not small. It's a lot of money and a lot of commerce runs through that 10%. But the rest of it is, I don't want to say it's illegitimate, but there are definitely shades of gray when it comes to legitimacy in the internet. A lot of it is just infrastructure, routers and switches and DNS servers and things that are there to keep the internet working, but isn't something you would see on a day-to-day basis. And then below that, we get into kind of that lower 30-40%, where you have to have specialized software and specialized intuition to get there and to interact in those groups. Some of those groups speak other languages. It's one obvious barrier. Some of it's technical. These are highly controlled areas that are encrypted and password protected, and only groups that are authorized to get in them can get in them. Okay, so that's my spiel of the internet. Okay, now let's bring it back to geopolitics. Okay, so some of the discussion questions at the end of the chapter I thought were interesting. Some are much easier to answer, or at least provide my input based on my experience than others. So let's kind of talk about a few of them. Okay, what are the questions? Okay, there's a question in the chapter about influence, foreign influence. And I like this question. It's asked a lot. Okay, let's hit Space Force real quick, because we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. And I hope our government doesn't either. Not that I said that. Okay, Space Force. Yeah, could it affect cybersecurity and the internet and protecting U.S. citizens? Yeah, sure, possibly. It's so vague, the concept is very vague. The command structure isn't set up yet. The cost isn't determined, though I've heard $8 billion over 10 years, which is our budget. Okay, there is a tremendous amount of connectivity in space. Right? We have lots of satellites, thousands of satellites, millions of pieces of debris. Personally, I think Space Force should go and maybe look at I think the debris is a larger threat to U.S. security or global security than the actual satellites, but that's the conservationist in me. Okay, satellites control lots of things. Some directly, meaning that they are the primary communication system for various things. Let's take a look at nuclear defense. On the West Coast, and honestly every coast of this great nation, we have a battery of missiles set up strategically throughout the US. They are designed to shoot down rockets when they come into airspace, right? Much like the air guard around Israel. Those systems are linked by copper and fiber, cables, right? Cables that are either underground or above ground or in the sewers or throughout poles across America. Backup systems for those are typically satellite. Satellites is something that you can't easily get to from a ground warfare perspective, so satellite communication is critical for nation-state defense. One could argue Space Force could, and potentially one of their operating goals is to protect satellite communication infrastructure. Okay. So let's move off Space Force. Let's talk about foreign influence. All right, so foreign influence, that's always been there, right? We have tried to influence other countries in various ways, some subversive, some not, through generations. If you look in the, we did it during the Cold War. We did it during World War I, World War II, varying ways with Germany and Russia. Fast forward to the Cold War, we certainly did our own propaganda operations with those that were at the time, the communist countries. So we had, China, Vietnam, North Korea, Russia, a piece of Germany there for a little while. Without getting into the drivers of greed and fear in humans, where I believe a lot of that kind of stems from. Propaganda operations, foreign influence, is highly effective. It works great. I mean, 50 years ago, we dropped pamphlets from planes. We had paper that would drop from the sky, to either promote democracy or to promote not communism. Now it's much easier, isn't it? We don't have to drop things we actually still do it, kind of, depending where we are, but for the most part, we don't. We use the internet. We use communication mechanisms. We use Twitter. We use Facebook. We use Instagram. We use the news. We use the media. Sometimes the media knows it. Sometimes they don't know it. That's kind of the scary. That's kind of the scary part, honestly, for me. If there's definitely a few in this room who've been around a little longer than I have. I'm in my 40s, by the way. It's not a joke, but. All right. You will think back to media and influence, right? The media's always influenced us in various ways, whether it was directly or indirectly, whether it was through advertising, whether it was through lobbyists and PACs. Some could argue that the government, for a while there was the USG had influence on media with respect to broadcast television and some of the stuff they put out. During Vietnam, the U.S. government obviously had influence on what we saw, what we didn't see through that conflict. For I won't say good reason, but for their reasons, the U.S. government's reasons. Russia, okay, it's all about Russia and China. So foreign influence. So I've talked about kind of nation, like our own influence, what our own government's been doing to us, or to other countries. Think of the Cold War banana republics in South America, where we had done a tremendous amount of foreign influence campaigns against various regimes. In 2011, the Russian government went through an election, right? They went through a parliamentary election. It was met with a fair amount of skepticism by their people. Right? They legitimately believe that maybe not all of them, but many legitimately believe that the elections were not genuine. Right? They were a ploy by Putin to gain control of the country, like he had been. Putin was a KGB agent. He was skilled and trained in various things, to include information propaganda, warfare, as well as some of the 16D, the 16 Directorate stuff, which is the electronic warfare. Okay, so what did we do, right? Our own government, Ms. Clinton, said, look, we don't believe that what you're doing is accurate. We feel bad for your people. Your people deserve a fair election. And then in 2014, ended up comparing Putin to Hitler during the annexation of Crimea. So our own reporting and our own open source research honestly, we believe that, to be frank, she pissed him off. She pissed him off. After that, a whole bunch of things changed. There was a ton of, I don't think it was wrong or it was right, but yeah, I mean, it was part of it. I'm like, yeah, nice work. But Putin was, for weeks, he drug around his office like a kid who lost a candy bar. He was mad. He was frustrated. You know, how dare the U.S. call me, these names, to compare me to a fascist leader. He had some time to think about that, he and his government. And during the 2016 election, just a few years past that, we see a whole lot of things that influence this last election. Now, maybe not during the election or a little bit, but certainly after, right? A ton of investigations, both on our part and other agencies. A number of indictments have gone into this. Yeah, we saw foreign influence affect an election. Absolutely, I can't say, I can say with a straight face, we saw it. We missed it, oops, right? I don't think Facebook and Twitter and Instagram really understood what was going on their own platforms. I don't think the US government understood necessarily what was going on. Russia started what's called IRA, the Internet Research Agency. This is a massive building downtown Moscow with floors and floors of computers and people operating machines. They would set up fake accounts. They would set up accounts. They were not backed by actual humans. They were backed by by a person who created a Mary Beth profile out of Georgia, who was a good old-fashioned Southern Bible girl, and she had very strong feelings about the conservative right. And then they set up someone on the West Coast who had very strong feelings of the liberal left. And they did it hundreds and thousands of times. And they were able to push propaganda and push messages across the social sphere to influence people. These influence campaigns have been around for hundreds of years. There's a term for it. If I were to manage my notes, but basically what I'm talking about is it's the normalizing of radical ideas, and that is we take something that's pretty far fringe, right, and it's called mainstreaming. There it is, mainstreaming. We mainstream it with enough groundswell of people talking about it, and it could be anything. It could be anything from the romaine lettuce in California is bad. It's giving us, digestional distress. It could be as fringe as that, and that's probably more factual. But it could be as fringe as that. It could be, the anti-vaccine movement. It could be, Antifa versus Patriots versus, the far right conservative groups. It could be pretty much any thought or idea that's going to divide people. And in the 2016 election, we saw that. We saw it come from immigration debate, racial debate. We saw it come from, obviously the border wall. For those in this room who've been around longer than I have and have seen elections, what strikes you as different in this election than other ones? For my limited time on this earth, it feels like it was more violent, right? We had protests throughout 30, 40 cities in America. Violent protests. Throwing gas and rocks and sticks. People would show up with masks and they brought milk, so they were ready for the tear gas. These were prepared protesters. I thought it was very violent in the last few years. We actually have, I can't say which city, but we actually have evidence, intelligence suggesting that, but showing that one riot was 100% created by online activity. That was not left or right. It was not U.S. left or U.S. right. It was 100% a foreign adversary creating left and right profiles, fighting each other in cyberspace that led to an actual kinetic, physical, violent attack here in America. That's scary to me. I'm not easily scared. My wife is. She hates scary movies. I am not. That is scary. To actually have I think it shows how suggestive we are as humans. I find it more in younger generations, to be perfectly honest, without stereotyping and getting off base. I did not grow up with social media. I didn't have email until I was well into college. Social media definitely came 10 years later. But the younger generations who were seeing it from when they're this big and they're growing up and they're putting a lot of faith in it because it's always been there. It's been for them. It's been a rock. For us, it is not. if you believe what you read online, you could make decisions based on that. And I think we saw that in 2016 with this foreign influence campaign. It's funny, when I was making my notes for this, I wanted to come up with an idea that was kind of out there, kind of fringe, that in the room we could kind of strategize on making it more mainstream, right? So I picked a topic, and it was just as the first couple of measles outbreak cases in Washington started. And I said, wow, what if a foreign government decided that we want to mainstream anti-vaccinations? Like, what if I'm Putin? Okay, what if I'm another government leader? I shouldn't pick on all Putin, but let's say I'm a government leader, and I want to just tear up America with them fighting each other on various things. Let's pick something like way out there that this will never work. We were honestly, a day later, I already saw Intel reporting that they're doing it. They're already pushing anti-vax movements. To get to get a chunk of a community to stop vaccinating themselves, that's incredibly powerful. And again, also scary. Okay. I'm not here to scare, I'm really not. But it is scary. I mean, this is a scary time, a scary world. Things are changing. We have to adapt, we have to be smart, we have to trust. We'd be less trusting of what we see on the internet. We'd be more trusting of what we hear of people who have the pedigree to talk about it. If I listened to my sister-in-law, I would not be vaccinated, and I would be in a lot of trouble. I think we all have people in our families and our friends who have definitely maybe spent a little too much time online and then read some stuff that was just way out there. It doesn't matter how many times I try to tell my sister-in-law that half of those accounts you're following, those aren't actual people. These are automated. Literally, it's a very small amount of code to do this. It's a small amount of code, like this much, to automate the pushing of propaganda through these accounts. Okay. I want to talk all day about Russia. How about China? Let's talk about China for a minute, right? Okay, China. Very different. China's a different beast for us. From a counterintelligence perspective, it is a different beast. They're massive. China's massive. Russia's smaller. Okay. With that comes some advantages. When we talk about geopolitics, we talk about the relationship between the U.S. and China, right? We could make fun of it. We could poke holes in it. We kind of need each other. We're kind of like a dysfunctional marriage, right? Not to pick on anybody who has a dysfunctional marriage, but we kind of are, right? I mean, some couples stay together for various reasons, sometimes with the kids, sometimes with the dogs, whatever it is. That's kind of us in China. We've been together a long time. It's a little painful at times. There's some hurt feelings. They've been committing we call it CNE, CNA, computer network exploitation and computer network attacks. So CNE, CNA. Those are two acronyms I'm going to give you guys today. Hopefully no more than that. Those activities have been highly detrimental for the U.S. and they've been amazing for China. The technology gap, the military technology gap, the industrial technology gap has been traditionally quite wide, meaning the U.S. has been very innovative, forward-leaning. Think of the dot-com boom, think of all of our communication networks, all the research and advancement that America has done over the last 40 years, and China. Okay, that gap, it's called the trade gap, or it's called the intelligence or technology gap. It is doing this every year, right? Narrowing, because of the use of the internet and how easy it is to get those secrets, that intellectual property into the hands of nation states. Cyber hacking is easy. Just about anybody could do it. It's not battleships and submarines and airplanes, right? This is war. This is a type of war. It's a digital war, cyber warfare. It's cheap. It's easy. It doesn't take much. Someone's sitting in a room with a couple computers, and they're persistent enough to trick and get in. In 2010, so one of the questions in the reading was about Chinese-based espionage on American citizens and companies. Okay, so let's talk about Google for a second. It was mentioned in the article, in the chapter. In 2010, Google was compromised by the Chinese. Okay? It's a classified investigation. It's hard to talk about because of that, but there is some open source stuff I can talk about. Okay. There was an intrusion set called Aurora, and this is Chinese state-run government cyber actors who had compromised Google. And there's lots of reasons that you would want to compromise Google. Google's massive. They have a ton of information on people. China's, without getting into too many details, communist countries are very sensitive about their citizens, aren't they? They're very sensitive about what their citizens say about them. Specifically dissidents, right? Citizens who have left China, or Russia, Cuba, that have come to the US that now have the freedoms of the press, freedoms of free speech. And we, as Chinese, Russian, and Cubans, can now talk about our really crappy governments and the bad things they do and the corrupt nature of them. Those governments, in turn, don't like that. So they target dissidents in America. And this actually happens pretty frequently. If you ever gone to San Francisco and hung out by the Chinese embassy, you will see people protesting this exact same thing. Google was compromised. They lost a lot of valuable information, a lot of targeting information for Chinese governments to go after their own citizens. So if not the dissidents who have left China, but the families who are still there. And that's equally as dangerous. It's easy, it's cheap, it doesn't rise to the level of what we would consider warfare in a kinetic response, right? We aren't clearly not going to war over it. We didn't go to war with China when they broke into the Office of Personnel Management and stole my own FBI profile. We did not go to war with China when they broke into, name it. I mean, name any defense contractor, aerospace contractor, whether it's Boeing, Lockheed, anybody who makes ships, planes, boats, radar, sonar, name it. I could give you a company who has been compromised. We don't go to war over that. Therefore, it's easy, it's cheap, and the consequences are pretty small, right? Yeah, Trump has tried it, Obama's tried it, Bush a little bit. We go into these disputes, these trade disputes. We even call them trade wars. It's not a trade war. It's just it is what it is. It's, hey, stop doing that. You're mean. We'll do it back to you. And we do. The U.S. government has its own groups of people who are skilled in this type of activity. Also way above classification level in this room. But they have it, we have it, right? One could call it a game. One could call it tit for tat. One could call it a bilateral warfare. But at the end of the day, we kind of need each other, U.S. and China. There's a fair amount of trade. Obviously, it happens with us and China. If you were an economist, you could talk about U.S. GDP, right? U.S. GDP, okay. Gross domestic product. The United States takes in 70% of its GDP from personal consumption, right? It says 70, that's more than one standard deviation. That's more than half. It's more than a little bit. That's 70%. Okay. The other few percents are government spending and and I think it's 3% exports. Pretty small. We don't make a lot of money by exporting our goods anymore. Used to. Not so much these days. It's based on the consumption, right? Okay. Our current budget is about $22 trillion. Our GDP is $22 trillion. Our deficit or our budget lapse is just over $22 trillion. So we owe more to other countries and our people and treasury than we make in a year. And that's not uncommon for people, right? I owe more in my house than I make a year. But it's not common for countries, usually, especially first world countries. So, okay, well, so what does that mean? All right, so we can only push so out. Now, this is me, not the FBI speaking. We can only push so hard on China, because considering we need them to make our stuff. Again, 70% of our GDP is based on personal spending. One can argue that's probably why there's such a great response to 2-day free shipping from Amazon. We need cheap goods, they make them. They keep their currency low so that their exports are cheaper than our own manufacturing abilities or our own ability to import from someone else. All countries change their currency based on what they need. We do it too. But when they do it, it's a little tough on us because it makes us more reliant on that economic relationship between China and America. Okay. So I'm over 30 minutes. You guys want to keep going? Do you want to stop for questions? Am I talking too long?
No, but when we get to questions, I'll
You hear me? Okay, cool. All right, let's talk about some more stuff. All right, Russian influence, China influence. Okay, there's some questions about geography and sensitivity to it. I think you probably understand my thoughts on geography with respect to cyberspace. Yeah, it definitely bridges the physical geography, right? The internet's great. We can talk to our family and our kids and our friends over the internet. We can FaceTime. It definitely brings people together. That is a good thing. People ask me about cryptocurrency, and should we get rid of cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency, it does have its merits. There are valid reasons why we use cryptocurrency. It's relatively anonymous. It's quick. It's outside, for the most part, the control of central governments. Yeah, that's pretty useful, right? It's not dependent on it's not clearly not fiat like the U.S. dollar used to be, and it's not based on. Now, it is highly unregulated, unstructured, and it's kind of a mess if you've ever actually tried it. It's kind of difficult to get at times. It's not as anonymous as you think it is. You actually do. Many places now are becoming more "quote unquote" legitimate, so they want a picture of your face, an actual selfie. You take a selfie on your phone and you send that to them. So the anonymity piece is kind of lost all its luster. But cyberspace, blockchain, i.e. cryptocurrency, yeah, there are definitely good things and good reasons why we have it. The inventors, the people who have adopted and deployed it, have done it for the most part, good reasons. But we have people who take advantage of everything. People take advantage I take advantage of the fact that I don't see very many PPB officers on standing when I drive home at night, so I drive faster. Right? We do take advantage of things as humans. We find ways to get around it. Cyberspace. Yeah, it's like I said, it's easy, it's cheap. We can bridge these geographic boundaries without committing a lot of money and resources to steaming battleships across the Pacific or fueling jets across the Atlantic. And historically, it has not been met with the same response, right? If someone did that, if Castro steamed some boats up to Florida and started shooting at people, we'd probably respond in the same way. If Castro and his team of cyber hackers did the same thing and they broke into Citibank and they took all of our financial records, yeah, we probably wouldn't respond the same way either. Nor would we respond in a physical way. So it's almost like a de-escalation of warfare. The human loss and the human capital piece is not involved, right? I think that's definitely one of the largest drawbacks of war is that people get hurt, and that's not good for governments that rely a lot on their military. Okay. What other topics do we want to talk about today? How about us, right? How about we as people? We can talk about foreign influence on campaigns. Again, unless anyone in this room is up for election this year, we're probably not as concerned about that. Or next few years. We can talk about safety. There's been lots of discussions about internet safety and pedophiles, internet, trying to get our kids, and that does exist. I'm not discounting it. But this is a discussion of geopolitics, not on pedophiles and and the various financially motivated crimes that accompany the internet. But from a geopolitical perspective, okay, it's unclassified. One of the larger breaches that happened in the last few years was U.S. government data, and specifically our identities, our names, social security numbers, date of birth, where we work, what we do. Okay, let's assume in this room we all work for the U.S. government. We're State Department employees, we're FBI employees, we're CIA employees, we're defense attachés. Okay, you are a career servant, and then you decide you want to go to any number of countries on vacation. There's China, Russia. It could be even Hungary. If a foreign adversary has breached systems that have your identity, and then you show up at their border because you hop off, Lufthansa and show up at the border control and they check your passport, and they know who you work for already, like that is a huge geopolitical issue or potential one, assuming that assuming that they take steps to kind of cross that boundary. And this does happen, actually. We give a lot of talks to state and local governments, i.e., the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, the mayor's office, the governor's office. Large companies, large businesses, we go out and talk to the large industry in the area who have people who travel to these countries that we've discussed today, Russia, China, even countries you wouldn't think about, the Middle East, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. Countries that already know our background, what we're doing, and who we are, they could use that to their advantage, right? They can use that to compromise you in some way. One of the largest threats to national security is an insider threat. An insider threat is employees of the U.S. government who have access to classified material who are compromised in some fashion, right? If you had an affair, if you're a gambler, there's lots of reasons people can be compromised by someone else. Foreign governments do the same thing. So, it's kind of a stretch for the geopolitical piece, but trying to kind of show how computer espionage affects us as citizens on a daily basis. Even if you weren't a government employee, but maybe you worked at a small local company that had decent research in maybe small reactors, or there's a number of clear defense contractors in the area you may have heard of, you may have worked for at some point. You may have worked on aircraft or underwater sonar, right? Those types of materials could be very useful for another country who wanted to learn the same thing and bridge that technology gap. So every time we lose data in this country, it can be hoovered up by another nation state to use that against us, whether you're a government employee or not. But it certainly is a safety concern that I have for people that I know and friends of mine. Okay, we're probably getting close to questions, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Okay, let's do some questions. Sir?
Here, I'm going to make sure that we're on a mic if we're asking a question.
Could you comment about what you're doing with regard to the students of Saudi Arabia who have left the country mysteriously after they've been not convicted yet, but are trying to or have done things illegally in this country and have disappeared back to Saudi Arabia? Could you comment on what you're doing about that situation?
Honestly, to be honest, I don't know what office is working that issue. My office is not working that issue, so I don't have the insight on anything that the FBI or the government's doing. I pretty much focus my time on what goes on in the state of Oregon. That's what I've been paid to do by the taxpayers. Sorry, I have no information on that. Any other questions?
I think maybe you know the answer to this question, which I've wondered about for a long time. All the calls, it seems like forever, but it's probably been several years that you get a call once to 3 times a week, maybe 3 times a day. We are calling on your PC problem, and it's obviously a foreign voice. And if you give us money, whatever, we're going to sign you up and whatever. And I said, we have Apple products, and click. Then I heard a whole group was caught in India, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what happened.
Okay, so the tech support scam is one variant of what you're describing. I have cases open in my squad on the same thing. It has to arise to a certain level of loss for us to open it, because it's so much. Honestly, you couldn't create a budget big enough for me to have to hit all of it. You just couldn't. I think that exact case, no, it wasn't our case, but yeah, you're absolutely right. These call centers, these PC tech repair scams, your computer has a virus, you need to do this thing and we'll fix it. Honestly, I think my mom fell for one of these a few years ago, where Microsoft called her and said she had a virus, and she got pretty far down range on that, and before I got a hold of her. Yeah, they're very good at what they do. They spend a lot of time building that script. Some of them actually do a pretty good job sounding like they're native U.S. speakers. Generally, we work up a case, we indict, and then we send those charges to our what we call our legat, or our legal attaches in India, and then we work with the foreign government to convince them, because again, we can't make them, we can't compel them, depending on what's going on. With India, we don't have a very strong mutual legal assistance treaty with, but I would imagine that. Yeah, we did just that. We were able to, put cuffs on someone and bring them back. I've done it myself in various countries that don't have these treaties, so we can get lucky with these types of operations. Sorry, ma'am.
In the article, there was they talked about malware in our infrastructure, and it said, they were talking about the electric grid in particular, and they said it was probably from both Russia and China. And my question, and it also said about Russia that they had sort of, protected their own infrastructure. I don't know how extensively. But are we in the United States, do you see us doing anything about that problem? It sounds like this is a real vulnerable area of this country, and are we doing anything? Do you see us doing anything to, protect our electric grid, for example?
I do. No, you're absolutely right. There are some really good articles, if you were to go look on the interwebs to find them, on Russia attacking U.S. energy grid. The classification level is a little high, but in general, yes, we were very familiar with that attack structure, that attack surface. It's not just America; it's honestly every country. Ukraine lost a chunk of their power grid for a while, and a few years ago from Russia. The Ukraine power grid actually extended outside of Ukraine, but the grid that went down was pretty much isolated to the border, even though the network kept going. So it was kind of it's definitely a message to Ukrainians that we not only are we in your network, we have access to your grid, but we can turn on and turn off the things that we want to, and not let that bleed over into other countries. Yeah, there have been attacks on U.S. infrastructure, and that comes in various forms, right? That comes in, again, malware, right? Malicious software. It also comes in the form of supply chain injection, right? This is equipment that goes on the energy grid that, say, Northwest Natural or PGE or Bonneville puts in place, but they've put in a piece of equipment that was manufactured somewhere else, i.e. China, et cetera. That supply chain injection is a real threat, is a real, what we call an attack surface, or something that's vulnerable. We have investigations, and we have a fair amount of people who look at these things, both within the FBI and other agencies as well. DHS spends a fair amount of time going out to utility companies and grid providers, doing security walkthroughs, doing security hardening, providing best practices. It's kind of challenging. I have seen my own experience. I have seen some of these utility companies not be very cooperative with government. We've actually gone out to places and said, hey, look, you need to look at this. This is not good. And they tell us, no. So yeah, right, there's this balance. There's certainly a balance of government oversight. I don't want a whole lot of government oversight. I've seen the government. But yeah, there are areas that we can probably improve upon as a society, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure, i.e. power, water, sewage, et cetera. But no, it's a good question.
Hi. First, thank you for coming today to speak. You've described an environment of propaganda, identity theft, manipulation of the media, these false social media accounts. This all creates a culture of distrust. What are your thoughts on the role of educators and education for youth entering this world of distrust? And I know that you're not an educator, but as a practitioner working in this field, what are the skills of value, socialization, empathy, critical thinking? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's actually a relatively common question. It's hard, and I mean I can answer it as me. It's hard to answer questions about the media and education when you're an FBI agent. There's a lot of rules about influencing First Amendment and things like that. But in general, I think we need to be teaching our kids that, in addition to, I think our children need to be more resilient, which I think is an apt goal. What we say in the Bureau is essentially trust nothing and verify everything. So that verification process is hard to teach people, right? You can just shut yourself off from all social media and all media, which I'm not advocating, except maybe for me on the weekends, but definitely shutting yourself off from those sources is maybe not the best idea. So I can't give, I'll be in a lot of trouble if I gave actual sources of where to find good media, but they're out there. It's getting harder and harder to find them. Even myself, I have a hard time finding media sources that I trust because it's gotten so polluted with advertising and there's so many ways to monetize media. From the advertising, from the clicking, from the programs for people to sell things on. Definitely, boy, that's a hard one to answer. Yeah, trust and verify, right? That's an easy answer to give. But that verification process is, I think it just comes down to reviewing media sources in aggregate, and looking at lots of different sources, and I tried to tell my own family members, I have a few of them who tend to gravitate towards a conspiracy theorist. And then, granted, I'm like, look, there's not, I keep telling my brother this, there's not this overarching conspiracy in the government that we're trying to, make you dumber and keep you stupid. And sure, there are people who want to do that. I mean, there's greed. Greed impacts everything. I mean, you could blame corporations and PACs and lobbyists. But I would be hesitant of following any media that always is always jumping that bridge to conspiracy and and extreme, right? Extremism. I don't think we're that. I think as a country we're not that extreme. I mean, I think most of us fit kind of in that bell curve. There's fringe groups on either side, and I think just the propaganda and the availability of information is creating is that mainstreaming effect of fringe groups. I think the best answer is lots of sources, and obviously critical thinking is a big one. It's hard to teach people who don't want to do it. Showing both sides of an argument is always good. I mean, debate.org is a place I go often to look at both sides of an argument to see where things are kind of lining up without just getting that one-sided view. Hope that helps. Sir.
Thank you. Okay, when it comes to the use of the internet to recruit and radicalize people here, I guess I'm mainly thinking of terrorist efforts. What I don't understand, and I don't know if you can comment on, is that there's a lot more of us than there are of them, and I don't know why we don't have buildings full of young people finding and taking down these sites, 100 a day, 1,000 a day, as fast as they put them up. We could, with our technology and people, we could be taking down those sites faster than they can put them up and before our young people have a chance to be recruited. And I don't, the Russians have demonstrated with one building they can have great influence. So why aren't we doing that?
Okay. So I have seen some movement in that area. Not quite as extreme. We do have, so ever since this has happened, there's been a lot of controversy in news at Twitter and Facebook, those two especially. Definitely other ones. We've noticed just from our own investigations, it is getting harder and harder for us to create fake accounts. I mean, my team creates fake accounts, right? We want to get close to a subject. we need to create a fake account and get close to it. There's lots of reasons why we would do that. No, I don't push propaganda. We're going after criminal enterprise groups and gangs and people like that, terrorists. Your first point is the radicalization of people in America based on this. Yeah, it absolutely happens. We'd be surprised how many people, young people, they see this and they're hopping on a plane to Turkey and they're crossing the border to Syria. It's shocking. I would have never guessed this years and years ago. So both Twitter and Facebook have taken a lot of steps to put in controls to look for these accounts. There's a number of websites that we tell people to go to. One's called Bot Check. One's called Synchron. What's that called? If you just Googled Twitter bot check, Twitter bot verification, you can actually put the name of the account, Facebook account, Twitter account, into the website, and it'll analyze the account. And what it does is it analyzes the accounts based on how long has the account been open, how many posts have the posts been made, how many friends or followers, right? What's the nature of the post? Is it the same post every time? Is it 15 or is it 5 or 15 posts a day, or is it 500 or 600 posts a day, right? Do these posts happen during times where someone should probably be sleeping eventually, right? Is there that rhythm of awake and sleep? It's pretty phenomenal how fast you could determine whether or not a post or poster is fake based on some of these really small things. We gave a presentation to the state legislature recently about this because they were worried about their own campaign efforts. So in terms of, now the U.S. government can. I'm not even allowed to open a case on this, right? Which might sound kind of funny. We asked the lawyers, and they know you can't target people who are expressing their First Amendment right, regardless if you believe they're Russian, Chinese, American. So I'm not even allowed to open cases on it. We monitor it. We look at it to see what's going on just to be informed, but really no more than a citizen could do. I'm not allowed to use court orders and all the fancy tools we have to do this. So the U.S. government can't do what you're asking. Private advocacy groups certainly could, absolutely. Private groups could. Educational and research groups certainly could. It's not illegal for them. The companies are getting a lot of heat on it, so their own internal controls are helping knock down a lot of these rogue accounts. But it's going to take some effort. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take, honestly, the onus is also partially on us, people who, if I'm reading something in my Twitter feed, I use Twitter for news all the time. It's not bad for news. It's not great, but it's not bad depending on what your sources are. I mean, I don't believe every source that I read. I try to verify what it is. Twitter has something called verified user. I try to focus on users that have been verified. I actually don't know what the verification process is, but it's more than just an email account and a fake phone number. So I guess that'd be my answer for that one.
Okay, we've got one more question over here.
I'd like to follow up on the issue of the electric grid. I recently read the book by David Sanger called The Perfect Weapon, which is very revealing. I'm concerned about the policy issue of independent businesses like Bonneville Power, which is a government business, but just to use it as an example if it was private, saying that they don't give a rip about what your findings are and the ramifications if they are attacked on this community and its power supply.
Yep, staggering, right?
Staggering.
No, absolutely.
So my question is, and you may not be able to comment, but I'll ask it anyway. Is it your belief, opinion, that legislation needs to be considered which would either mandate or expose them to public information by scoring the hardening or security of these various critical infrastructure operations to put public pressure for those who would refuse to take the advice of your organization or others?
No, that's fair. That's a fair question. Personally, I do believe that more legislation should be enacted to give law enforcement or intelligence agencies the tools that we need to do our job. Any industrial control system, we call it an ICS system or SCADA system, and these are things that run water and sewer and power. Some of these are really old, incredibly old systems. They've been around since the 50s and 60s. They're old, they're analog, it's copper wires and relays. Very, very, very old. Some of it predates, maybe not so much anymore, but for a while, some of it predated actual digital electronics, meaning it was, the IC chips. And then the advent of IP-based, packet-based networks came up in the 90s, right? And then of course the internet built on that. Companies like networks because they can communicate quickly, share files, email. That's great. That's awesome. Except when you connect that network to this network that was built in the 60s, right? And I shouldn't call it a network. I should call it a device, or a set of devices. These ICS SCADA systems, these industrial control systems, they're very old. I used to do walkthroughs for the city of San Francisco and Menlo Park for their water towers, and they had all kinds of things at the time. This is a while back, kludged together, right? You had a very basic relay on top of a mountain that controlled a valve, much like a dam, and that water flows downhill into either power generation or fresh water for our drinking water supply. And some of those things were connected to then RF-based links, meaning microwave, digital microwave, analog radio frequency links, right, that anybody could get in the middle of and tamper with. And then down to a ground control station to then go to an IP-based system, which would be over a corporate network. Now, sure, corporate networks have varying levels of security put on them. I think we've all seen the breaches of Home Depot and Target and Anthem in the last couple of years. Corporate networks can also be really crappy and be very easy for adversaries to get into. And I completely agree with you. It is quite frustrating to go out to a company that has your PII, your name, SOCH, credit card, date of birth. That's right? There are companies that will not work with us, absolutely will not work with us. Very frustrating for us. And then you compound that with companies that represent critical infrastructure, back to power, back to water, sewer. What else has been highly frustrating lately? Traffic. Well, that's city governments. Right. A lot of these functions are done in control of private sector companies, not through municipalities like a city or state government. So no, sorry, long way around that one. Yeah, I would want to see more legislation to give us more flexibility on the tools we use on cyber investigations, both domestic and abroad, to be perfectly honest. Because it's fastly changing and our laws haven't. Most of the things I do are based on laws that were last changed in pre-internet, in the early 90s. So it's very, very difficult for us to do what we do. It's very slow. By the time we write our warrants in our paper that we've been doing for 200 years, cyber adversaries have moved on. They've hidden their tracks and they're gone. So we fight constantly with legislative affairs on the Hill about more laws to give us tools we need to go after things. The problem is when this is me, not the FBI, when the legislative branch sees what we're asking for, they think it's us wanting to get into privacy issues and doing things more of a subversive nature, which is not at all what I'm after. I don't want to invade privacy. I want to get to the cyber actors quicker and faster.
We are out of time. Let's give Gabe Gunderson a big hand.
Thank you.
I think the big takeaway is Jackson Pollock, the painter, once said, "New needs need new techniques." And we cannot use these same tools of writing out warrants and thinking about concepts like intellectual property in the way that we once did. There's all kinds of ways to protect yourself. I always tell people just even not just bot.org, but Snopes. Do not believe everything you're told. My mother taught me that. Anyway, we have books for sale, $22 out on the table. We will be here next week talking about nukes. And Have a great day.